Alright, so in this video we'll be looking at the ovaries, the primary structure of the female reproductive system, and the processes by which oocytes develop and prepare for fertilization. And then we'll talk a little bit about the ovarian cycle as well. So that is the plan. Let's get going. So the ovaries produce egg cells. Remember, the pronunciation is oocytes. These are the female gametes, and just like we saw with the male gametes, they are haploid, these oocytes, or when they are prepared, as they're preparing, they're becoming haploid cells, and that means that they have one set of 23 chromosomes. And they have multiple functions. Producing the egg, the oocytes is one. They also produce the female sex hormones, including a variety of compounds that we refer to as estrogens, and another variety of compounds that we refer to as progestins. So estrogen is one of, or estrogens are, they're multiple compounds. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. And progesterone is one of the progestins that the oocytes produce. The ovaries produce. They also secrete inhibin, just like we saw with the cells in the testis. And it is, just like we discussed with the male, involved in negative feedback on FSH. So we'll be talking in a later video, we'll be talking more about the female reproductive hormones. So like the testes, the ovaries form from tissue posterior to the parietal peritoneum, near the kidneys, and then they descend into place near the upper margin of the pelvis, right back near the pelvic wall. So they're held into place by folds of the peritoneum that over time develop into ligaments. And one of the pictures, let's see, it's the image on page 844 shows some of these ligaments, or at least one of them, the round ligament, that helps to secure the ovaries in place. Okay, so the structure of the ovary, there's a medulla. This is the central portion. So the medulla always relates to the interior of a structure, middle. That's the way to help you think about it. And it's composed of loose connective tissue. There are blood and lymphatic vessels there, and nerve fibers are found there as well. The business portion of the ovary is the cortex. So despite the sound of this word, it refers to, I think of it as the rind, the outer portion of the ovary. Here the tissue, rather than being a loose connective tissue, is much more tightly packed, and it appears granular, so it appears kind of grainy when slices of it are looked at under the microscope. And this is because it is packed with what are referred to as ovarian follicles. These are little clusters of cells that include an oocyte that is waiting till the time when it gets called forward to grow and develop and potentially become an oocyte that will be fertilized. And then there is connective tissue layer around the external surface of it called the tunica albuginea. Crazy name, but so tunica, though, remember that means coat. I think we've talked about that back when we were discussing the layers around. I can't remember what it was, but anyway. Yep, it is still not coming. Okay, I'll let you figure out for yourself if you are keen to know what structures have the term tunica in it. All right, so it's a connective tissue with an epithelial covering. All right, so that's the structure. Well, look at that. Is there something else that I wanted to say there? Nope, I think that's it. Okay, so now we're ready to talk about oogenesis, the process of taking one of these cells and converting it into taking a diploid cell and converting it into a haploid cell that would be a female gamete. So prior to birth, there are epithelial cells found in the cortex of the ovary that form what are called primordial follicles. And inside of this primordial follicle is a primary oocyte that is surrounded by a bunch of follicular cells. So here's a primordial follicle. This is the primary oocyte, and then all around it, in a big cluster, are follicular cells. Okay. So this primary oocyte starts or begins the process of meiosis. So remember, that's that two-stage, two-cell division process. So here's the primary oocyte, and it would do division and produce two daughter cells. Now notice, though, as I'm doing this, that rather than being an equal division, this first division is an unequal division. So one of the daughter cells gets all the cytoplasm, and the other one is going to be kind of kicked aside. This one may keep dividing and produce two more daughter cells, but these are all going to be non-functional, non-viable. They will just degenerate. Our main cell, the chosen one, will also divide, and one of the daughter cells will be large, and the other, again, will be very small. It too will degenerate. So this is the process of meiosis for a female gamete. So this process begins, but it stops mid-process, and the oocyte remains in suspended development until after puberty. And after puberty, then, every month a set of follicles will mature to produce eventually only one follicle that makes it, that will produce the egg cell, that will be the egg of the month, if you will. So a child then, a female, a girl, is born with all the primary oocytes that she will ever have. And many of them will not ever be called into service and will degenerate before they get the chance to do whatever it is that the oocytes have been, are expected to do. So, and this whole process goes, it's a similar process that we see with the male. There is there's a lot of estrogen being produced during fetal development that guides or promotes the development of the ovaries and all of the other female structures of the body. But shortly after birth, estrogen production ends and does not pick up again until puberty. So at puberty, in response to the production of follicle-stimulating hormone, the ovaries become larger, and the follicles will start to develop. And so with each reproductive cycle, and so when we're talking about reproductive cycles here, we're talking about each monthly menstrual cycle. So with each menstrual cycle, multiple of these primordial follicles will mature into what are called primary follicles that have an enlarged primary oocyte inside of them. So here's our primary oocyte, and they'll be surrounded by these follicular cells. And there'll even be a little layer of follicular cells across the top of it. So if this is the surface of the ovary, this is what we're going to see eventually. And the primary oocyte will be surrounded by this layer called the zona pellucida of glycoprotein. So as these, as many as 20 primary follicles begin to develop, the primary oocyte will continue with meiosis until it produces a secondary oocyte. So here we are. Here's the primary follicle. Begins meiosis. At the point at which ovulation is going to occur, we're here at this stage where, so here's the primary oocyte, this is the secondary oocyte, and this is referred to as a polar body. So by the time the chosen, the selected, so if multiple begin, only one of them will be selected as the follicle of the month, and so by that time, the non-selected ones will begin to degenerate, and the follicle of the month will go through its first full cell division, producing a single polar body and a secondary oocyte sitting there inside of its follicle. So that secondary follicle then has the secondary oocyte inside. So now I'm going to just draw the follicular cells as a line. Here's the secondary oocyte hanging out, and it's got a covering. So here's the rest of the ovary. And by the way, if you're looking in the book, there is an image on page 843 to help you make some sense of this. And what you've got to know about that image is that, it makes it look as if the follicle migrates around the ovary. That is not the case. The follicle doesn't move. It's always in the same place. But they're showing on one ovary what all of the different stages look like. So maybe that'll help you make some better sense of that picture. I think it's a bad way to try to present it. So what gets produced then at the point of having a secondary follicle is that there is this secondary oocyte sitting inside with its zona pellucida, there we are, around it, and it's inside what kind of appears or looks like a little blister with a lot of fluid. So this is all fluid in here. So it's in a nice big watery bath. So as we were saying, at the end of about week 1 of the menstrual cycle, then one of the follicles outgrows the others and becomes the dominant follicle, and the others degenerate. So that by 10 to 14 days, this dominant follicle is fully developed into a mature follicle, and it's ready for ovulation. So right around day 14, give or take, of course, and this is assuming a 28-day cycle. So not every woman has a 28-day cycle. The cycle could be anywhere from 21 days all the way up to 35 days, and we would still talk about those cycles as being normal. But right at the midpoint of the menstrual cycle then, there's a big surge of luteinizing hormone that's released, and that causes a big influx of fluids into the follicle. So it causes the follicle to swell with fluids, and there's also a little weakening of the cap of cells that, the tissue that overlays the follicle. And so the follicle will rupture, and it releases this secondary oocyte. And if things go well, then that oocyte will be drawn into the uterine tubes by the little cilia, the cilia that are waving inside the uterine tube. They make a current that draws that secondary oocyte into the uterine tube. Now at this point, the follicle location changes its function. It's no longer trying to grow into a secondary oocyte. Instead, all the follicular cells grow and begin storing up fat, so they store up lipid, and they grow and proliferate, and so the whole blister area, so if this is where the blister was, it fills up with these cells that are full of lipids. And it becomes a structure here at the surface of the ovary that is referred to as the corpus luteum. And the job of the corpus luteum then is to produce progesterone and estrogens and send those hormones out into the bloodstream. The uterus is going to respond to those hormones. Now, if the oocyte doesn't get fertilized and doesn't, and so if there's no embryo that implants in the wall of the uterus and starts to send signals back, the eagle has landed, we are here, then the corpus luteum will degenerate. If, on the other hand, a zygote develops, fertilization occurs, the zygote develops, and that zygote goes and implants on the uterus, the lining of the uterus, then it sends signals back to the corpus luteum telling it, hey, keep going, we need the progesterone, and as long as the pregnancy is active, then the corpus luteum will remain active as well. So it turns out that the process of meiosis does not complete for that secondary oocyte until after the fertilization event. So here's now our secondary oocyte. It's got zona pellucida around it. The sperm are attacking it, and it actually takes several sperm working at the same spot to digest their way using the acrosome toward the secondary oocyte. Eventually, one of those sperm penetrates, leaves its tail behind, that falls off, and now here's the nucleus of the secondary oocyte. Here's the nucleus coming from the sperm. Right at this point, or a little bit after this point, this cell will divide again, and it kicks out a polar body. One of those small, no cytoplasm cells, and the two nuclei will merge into a single nucleus, and that is when we have fertilization and a proper diploid zygote formed. And that's what we call this, the first stages of development are referred to as the zygote stages. And only after some of the primitive the organ systems begin developing would we begin to refer to it as a fetus. As an embryo. Okay.